So today we're going in a slightly different direction. We're speaking to Dr. Amina Sugimoto, who brings products in from around the world into the Asian market. And she's essentially a one-stop shop. And that sounds too good to be true. We got the chance to talk to her, and I had the chance to meet her at a conference a few weeks ago. And it sounds like you don't have to become an expert. There are people who can ease your way. But I was particularly interested in the different cultural attitudes.
Yes, I found her site extremely interesting because the variety of products really spoke to maybe some cultural differences or healthcare differences that they face in Japan that we might not be as familiar with here in the States. Very interested to hear when she's going to bring on more products and how she intends to grow.
So let's take a listen.
Welcome to the Business of the V. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Alyssa Dweck.
And I'm Rachel Braun-Scherl. Each week, we bring you the most fascinating investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, and healthcare practitioners who are making things happen in women's sexual and reproductive health.
If you are a woman, know a woman, have a business, or care about your V health and wellness, fasten your seatbelts and listen in to another informative and inspiring episode.
We are so happy today to have our guest, Amina Sugimoto, who in addition to being the CEO and co-founder at Fermata, has a bunch of other interesting and relevant degrees. She has a doctorate in public health and a master's degree in global health policy. So a multiple threat. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for having me.
So we were lucky enough to get to meet. You're across the world. We met in another place across the world last week at a health conference in Tel Aviv. I would love you to share with our audience what you do and how you came to see a need and then had the vision to start your company.
Yeah, so I guess I was always in healthcare field, studying public health for a long time. I was in academia, and I worked at a policy sector for a while afterwards. But one point, I think in around 2016, I thought, I kind of got bored in policy. Let me just jump into somewhere new. So I kind of worked at a VC world for 2 years. And while I was there, I came across a company from the US called Modern Fertility. I think they're trying to raise Series A or Series B around for like 7-8 million at the time. And that's when I first found out that, in the West, something fun is happening around women's health. There are a lot of companies, a lot of investment are going in. So in 2019, just before we started, just before COVID, what I did was I asked a few of my friends to join me to basically ask companies around the world and doing femtech, to send their product to Japan for free. This is way before I started my company. And I did an exhibition on femtech in the middle of Tokyo. I emailed about 200 companies, about 30 companies to reply back and actually send their product for free. So we did like a little art exhibition. I sort of advertised it using just with my SNS, so just with my circle of friends. But it turned out that over 120 people came. So we only had about 60 tickets, but it's all sold out. It was quite expensive. It was $25 the tickets. So I wanted to see how many people are actually interested in coming to see this product by paying money. And it turned out that over 120 people came. And I realized that, wow, there's so many people interested in learning more about what these products are and actually using them. So Fermata started from that experience in 2019 October. So around the time that COVID started, actually, as a space where people can actually get to know more about different women's health and well-being products, not only in Japan, from abroad. And while I was doing that, I realized that there are a lot of companies from abroad that are interested in entering into Asian market, but simply difficult because language, culture, regulation barriers. So essentially now what we do is we help a non-Japanese company to enter into Japanese and Asia market. We also have a branch in Singapore. So it's essentially a one-stop market entry opportunity that we provide. So that's the main thing we do, but we also provide consultancy to Japanese big companies because they actually now are super interested in the women's health space.
So I must ask, as a gynecologist, of course, and taking care of so many women in the menopause space, I really perused your site, so interesting. And I was curious, how do you decide what products to procure? And what I noticed very obviously missing in my eyes was something for hot flashes. Is this because that's not a big problem for the visitors to this website and or in the culture in Japan? Or is it for another reason?
I would say, though, to be 100% honest, at this moment, we haven't reached the point that we can actually import and bring in product that we want. 90% of the product we want to bring in are not listed there. So there are many reasons, right? For like the menopause products, there are not many, I would say, globally even compared to, let's say, menstrual products. So the companies that are interested in entering the Japanese market, ratio-wise, is not as many as menstrual product, for example. And there's a regulation issues as well. A lot of these products are not even recognized as a medical device in Japan yet. So Japanese government has different sort of regulatory rules that even if it's approved in FDA, you have to go through PMDA, which is a Japanese version of FDA. So Fermata has a license to be able to deal with medical device, posy drugs, and also cosmetics. I think there are 5 products in pipeline now. We're actually currently waiting for PMDA to give an approval, but that takes, sometimes years. So I think mainly at the moment, unfortunately, the reality is that we cannot bring in the products we want.
Okay. And here I'm relying on a study that's huge here in the US called the Swan Study, which looked at women across the ages in regard to their menopausal symptoms. And it does seem that the African American and Hispanic population tend to have the highest rates of disturbing vasomotor symptoms, and that the Asian population was lower on that list. So I just figured it was an academic decision on your part. So thanks for letting me know that.
I guess it might have been. It was interesting when I was at this conference with Rachel, there was a study looking at that, comparing European, not by race, but European population and American and Japanese. And it turned out that Japanese have different sort of like symptoms, right? So we have more of a mental symptoms over menopause rather than physical. I think that was one of the findings of that research. And I shared that with my team. And then they were all surprised because people are, suffering from physical symptoms as well, but maybe not as much. But some of the sort of menopause product that we see from overseas, we do an exhibition here and people do get a chance to see it if they come to Fermata. And then we do see a lot of people are interested in it. It's just simply, we just cannot bring it in because of regulation and all that. But yeah.
So going back to the initial question, for the products that you are able to bring in from a regulatory perspective, how do you decide among the ones that you are exposed to, which ones you want to bring in? Is there any medical oversight? Is there a testing panel? How do you figure out that you're going to bring in these 3 products, but not those? What is the process to evaluate how robust they are?
There are 3 stages, I would say. One is, oftentimes either my team or from the company side, or Fermata has a community of users and they come to us and, hey, this is a product we want to bring in. We also have a database of about 1,000 companies from around the world. And then we're in communication about 800 of them. So that's sort of like source of companies that we work with to bring it in. So annually we decide what companies to bring in or start the regulatory process. We have a partnership with, for example, Tokyo University Hospital, a local gynecologist, and once that are very, I would say, scientific ones that I bring it over to them. We have a casual dinner once a month, and the doctors can get to sort of researchers get to sort of try the products and we get feedback from them. And then based on that, we usually decide. But some of the products are not very scientific. We just basically decide on our own within our Fermata community that our users basically give us feedback. They get to use some of the product as well. And every month we have a lunch scheduled for our community, and they can come in and they can sort of give us feedback on a certain product that we want to bring in. That's basically it. And then of course, when we sort of internally decide there's like a certain criteria we sort of pick. But we do get external sort of review and advice.
What has been the most surprising experience you've had while you're trying to bring these companies? Are there enormous differences? It's a silly question. I'm sure there are enormous differences in what explodes in popularity in the Asian market than here. Not all of them. Some will be an absolute crossover. Are there particular areas where you see a huge cultural difference relative to the countries from which they're imported?
So I don't know if this will be the right answer. The term femtech here in Japan is becoming quite popular. I would say the general public knows about it. It's been on every single magazine. Every year, I think it's the government, or I actually don't know whether if it's a government or one of the biggest marketing agency. They basically pick about 5 words that was most commonly used in that year, and femtech was one of it. We had a prime minister election last year, and 4 candidates came in. One of them was my friend, actually. And in one of the debates, she was asked, they were asked, which industry do you think will be the leading industry for Japan in the next 5 years? And she said femtech. So it's becoming a bit of a trend here now. I think I can probably say that Fermata has sort of created that trend. And what happened was that about 4 years ago, right after the first initial event that I told you about, that I brought about 20 products and did an exhibition. After that, I started my company now. It's my office with my team member and some of our advisor investors. And we had all these tech products on our table. And we were like, where do we start? Which product should we bring in? What sort of movement should we make? And one of our investors had a really good point, a male investor actually. And he was like, tell me about the menstrual product market in Japan. And I was like, it's complete opposite from the US. While 90% uses tampon in the US, 90% here uses pad, and only 10% uses tampon. And he was like, so does that mean that people are not used to inserting something inside their vagina, right? Because pad is not insertable. And we were like, yeah, that's true. He was like, well, then why would Japanese people if they're not used to putting something inside them every month, they're not going to put a sensor or device inside them. There will be a huge sort of psychological barrier there. So you have to break that first. So what we start doing then is to bring in period underwear.
Yeah, those have become so popular. I'm curious, do you have medical representation on your advisory board? Do you get input from doctors or healthcare providers? Yeah,
so we do have a local gynecologist, and also we work with Tokyo University Hospital, which is one of the, I would say, Tokyo University sort of gynecology department center, because they are one of the largest medical field. But what I mean is, so once we start we decided to bring in period underwear instead of all these devices, and that became a trend. All these Japanese sort of big retail companies, brands like clothing brand, underwear brand, they're all making them now. And once the public start using period underwear, they start to realize that, there's other options, more comfortable options rather than pads. Let me just explore more. That's sort of like the mental work, right? So they're now moving into menstrual cups and not a tampon. And so fortunately or unfortunately for the Japanese public, where 90% of people here don't speak English, femtech sort of became a word that represents a movement within the country that's it's a right to learn about their body. It's okay to talk about the taboo topic rather than the actual tech side. So that's how the public sees. And I think it's good because that kind of shows that the market is growing. I think every single clothes making companies are now trying to make underwear now because they see that it's the opportunity there. But yeah, I'm sort of hoping that to move towards more of the tech in the next couple of years. But I think at least there's a sign that the market is growing.
So here's today's hot flash. It seems that Japan has one of the most generous paid leave policies in the world for both women and men. By law, Japanese men can take as much as a year's leave from work to give care and still be paid a substantial portion of their salaries. I am curious as well because, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe there's as much of a weight or obesity epidemic in Japan as there is maybe in the US. And yet I still see many incontinence products on your site as well. And I don't mean for protection against incontinence, but rather for maintenance or prevention, like the Kegel exercises, for example. Is there a market for that there as well?
The answer is yes. And I actually not sort of specialist in this, but I guess obesity may be one of the main reason, but there may be other.
Oh, yeah, there are multiple risk factors, but obesity is one of them. And I feel like that's something that comes up in my office and in my practice all the time, have weight management as part of an overall program to help with incontinence. So I just wondered, I mean, part is genetic, part is childbirth, part is, I think, babies or instrumented deliveries. I bet that did dawn on me.
Yeah, so I guess what I see is that the woman just gave right after gave birth. Woman who's constantly working in an office with a computer sitting constantly. In 30s and 40s, I think those are the ones that look for incontinence sort of products. I hear a lot of, people, maybe because I work for Fermata, but sort of look for incontinence sort of products. Now, that's an interesting one because we couldn't really say these sort of Kegel exercise products can prevent incontinence problem. We couldn't really say that up until last April because within the pharmaceutical field law here, they didn't recognize that as a medical device.
Okay.
They didn't let us link those two. We've been working with the government for the last 2 years now, and they released an update on the regulatory sort of a pharmaceutical field law that we can actually say as a class 1 medical device, Kegel exercise products can be medical device and prevent incontinence problems and so forth. Some of the products we have there, we're in the process of registering those as a medical device. So we started off by targeting consumers from Fermata 3 years ago, and we show that still on the website. But about 95% of our income now come to B2B business. Because one, we realized that, so one is with the overseas products, right? The ones that are coming to Japan, and we do from regulation to localization to marketing to branding. We also have a brick and mortar stores in Tokyo and Osaka, and also branches in Singapore. So they can we sell their product there too. We also realized that there's a huge market, B2B as in Japanese corporates. And these are big multinational Japanese companies. And they're looking for one, either using these products and services as their benefits for the employee, but they just don't know how to. So they're looking for ways. And then two, they have a lot of the companies like Sony and Panasonic, they have technologies that they want to apply to a new field, but then they think that women's health might be a great opportunity, but they just don't know how to. So we do a consultancy on these two areas, and the huge opportunities for non-Japanese product entering Japanese market and then do B2B business.
Interesting. How does it work? We have a lot of discussion always, but even more in the past several months about parental leave and however an organization defines reproductive care. What are the policies or the attitudes within Japan on those issues? Does everybody get parental leave? Do just the people who deliver or who are the primary caretaker get parental leave? And do those issues here, they seem to touch every part of our lives. The conversations become legislative and political and health related. How does that play out in Japanese society as a benefit area or an area of interest for employers?
Thank you. So I think, this is only my personal opinion, so it could be completely wrong in the reality. But the way I see it, someone who grew up outside and living here for the last couple of years, is Japanese are super good at following rules and making rules. And they look at what's happening outside of Japan and they're like, oh, we have to do this. And they make parental leave rules. I think mother can get up to 1 year of maternity leave. So in total, she gets about 2 years. And then father can get at 2 now. And then I think we're the first country, one of the first country who implemented period leave, as in like once if you have a very heavy period, you can actually take days off and that won't be counted as using your holiday. I think Spain recently implemented that. We implemented about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. But doesn't really mean that people actually take advantage of that. The rules are there, but the culture is different. People don't really take in account of like how would people benefit from these rules, good or bad. And so if you look at the period leave and the ones that implement in Spain recently, I think Spain or Portugal, no one is using it now.
Wow.
Because 90% of the people, management positions still in Japan are men. In fact, 95%. And a younger woman, they have to go report to their male boss and say, hey, I have period every month. Like, who wants to do that? So the rules are there, but they never actually thought about how it would be sustained. And I think for parental leave, again, the similar thing, like obviously women take advantage of the fact that they can take 2 years off. And they take 2 years old. There's also societal pressure that the woman has to stay with baby as long as they should. So she ended up taking 2 years off and it became difficult to go back to work and end up leaving. For men's side, the father can get, what's the term in English?
Paternity leave?
Well, as in like, I don't want to sort of say that marriages only happen between men and women, but I'm just taking an example of
like spousal leave.
So the partner side that doesn't have, didn't deliver the kid physically, and it happens to be men in Japan quite often. They can take some days off, but again, like so culturally, they get a pressure that they can't, so they don't. So the rules are there, but it doesn't really mean that everyone is sort of like taking advantage of that.
So the policies are there, and then we just still have an issue around implementation and what that communicates.
Yeah, and I guess, but COVID has changed a lot. I think now that people can actually work from home, and a lot of partner side, the one that didn't deliver a baby, noticed that there's a lot of work that one has to do at home as well, and it's okay to work from home. I heard that the culture is slowly changing, but from the mother's side, when I do a recruitment for my company, quite a lot of women apply to mine saying that they realize they want to go back to work after giving a baby as soon as she can, after 3 months or 4 months. But she realized that there is either a lot of pressure or the way that company is structured is impossible to go back. So we do quite a lot of like applicants saying that she wants to work, but not in the current company because she's looking for an opportunity that she can work in a flexible sort of environment. I guess women start to realize that it's okay to work. So I think something is changing in Japan after COVID, I would say.
Interesting. Very interesting.
If there's one thing, a piece of advice you want to give to physicians who are developing companies or products or entrepreneurs, what should they keep in mind when they decide if and when they want to expand into the Asian market? And I know that's a big question and it's not a simple answer, but are there a couple of watch outs or things that you must do in order to be able to turn this idea into a reality if you're a US company or a company from another part of the world that wants to enter this market?
Well, I think this applies to all the health tech companies. When I was working at a VC firm right after my studies, and I was basically helping investors to look into any policy or regulation barriers for a health tech companies to come into Japanese market. And it's one of the very important things to consider, but unfortunately, oftentimes is often forgotten until the point that they actually need to comply. So I would say if it's American company enter into Asian market and regulations, whether if it's a medical device or not, it's something that you might want to check it first. Because if the idea of I just gave an example of how pelvic floor exercise up until recently wasn't considered as a medical device. What I mean by that is, even if you have a certain marketing term that you want to use, it prevents incontinence. Even if it did in scientific world, if the law or regulation is not being updated to that point, you can't say that. So there's no way that you can act. You can only say that it's for Kegel exercise. You can't really say what is it for. So if there's certain sort of marketing term that you want to use or the effects of the product, you might want to make it sort of clear and then find out what does it mean within the Japanese or Asian regulatory framework. Oftentimes in Southeast Asia, if you have FDA approval, you may be able to skip all the regulatory process because they follow the FDA guideline, but you also want to check that. There's another important thing, aside from the regulation, is health systems. So I see that a lot of American company comes into Asian market saying like, this actually saves the cost of whatever insurance company, but we have a national health insurance where every single Japanese is insured. And depending on your income, but 30% to 10% a co-payment system. And if your monthly payments in medicine, healthcare goes above $500 approximately, that's the sort of top. So the rest the government pays. So we're not really used to, and the dentist is also included. So we're the country that even if you have a fever or like a bit of a headache or even if you have temperature, we just end up going to nearby clinic. It's a completely different system than the US. There's no sort of like, people don't really think here how to save medical costs, for example. Rather than using a device, expensive device for incontinence problem, it might be safer and faster to go to a doctor nearby and they'll give you a treatment for really cheap. I wouldn't say cheap, but not as expensive, I would say, than the US. So the health system is a complete difference. So even when you're thinking about the business sort of model, it's often difficult to bring in exactly the same model as it works in the US. And I think those are two things that keep in mind before entering into Asian market.
Interesting. And we could probably take a little bit of a lesson here in the US because we do have a little bit of a broken system. So thank you for that. Thank you so much. This was very interesting. I'm going to watch and see your platform grow because I'm sure there'll be more products as time comes along.
Thank you. We're also hosting every year. So the first initial event that we hosted in September, that kind of evolved into something big. And we call it Femtech Fes. And every October, this year, 14, 15, 16, we host an event exhibition in Roppongi. Last year, we had over 1,500 people and over 150 products from 26 countries, 6 regions all over the world. And this year, we're expecting to have over 3,000 people and 200 products. We also have invited companies from around the world, like CEO of well-known femtech companies, and it's going to be a big party. So if any of the listeners are interested in attending or having your product participated, it's all free for participants. It's free to participate for femtech companies. So please send me an email.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And thanks for starting your day so early. We have
it's all right.
12-hour time difference. So we really appreciate it because we wanted to get you on the show and share what you're doing with people. So have a great day and many, many thanks.
Thank you so much.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast at businessofthev.com for the latest trends and trendsetters in women's health and business.